The FIA's search for new teams to join the F1 grid has ended, and a joint bid by Andretti Autosport and Cadillac has been given the green light to join the sport. Though they don't now have a permission slip to bring their cars to the grid, they've just got their foot in the door. The real gatekeeper is Formula 1 management and the current 10 teams. Today we'll talk about Michael Andretti's potential new team, what else he needs to do to get a car onto the track, and why it might still not happen. So let's get started. The US-based Andretti team's bid to enter Formula 1 with General Motors' Cadillac brand has been approved by motorsport's governing body, the FIA. Andretti Formula Racing were the only team approved by the FIA out of 4 candidates, who made it to the second phase of the new team process. All others were deemed not to have met the required criteria. Andretti Cadillac's bid will now be assessed by rights holders Formula 1 on a commercial basis. F1 will only admit Andretti if it considers their entry to add value to the championship as a whole. There is no defined period for this assessment to take place, and it is likely to last some months. We'll talk about whether or not they will accept Andretti's bid shortly, but first, let's see what the FIA said about Andretti's bid. A statement from the FIA said each application was assessed based on sporting, technical and financial analysis. President Mohammed bin Sulayem said, "The FIA was very clear in establishing stringent criteria for entry from the outset of the expressions of interest procedure. Our objective, after rigorous due diligence during the application phase, was to only approve prospective entries which satisfied the set criteria and illustrated that they would add value to the sport. The FIA is obliged to approve applications that comply with the expressions of interest application requirements, and we have adhered to that procedure in deciding that Andretti Formula Racing LLC's application would proceed to the next stage of the application process." Andretti Formula Racing LLC was the only entity which fulfills the selection criteria that was set in all material respects. The FIA did not reveal the identities of the other teams who were assessed for the second phase of the process, but they are widely known within the sport. The final 4 were Andretti, a partnership between New Zealand's Ronin Cars and the Carlin Racing Organisation, junior category race team Hitech, and an Asian partnership known as Lucky Sons. 2 other candidates, Formula Eagle, led by former BAR team boss Craig Pollock, and Pantera Team Asia, were ruled out at an earlier stage. In a statement, Formula 1 said, "We note the FIA's conclusions in relation to the first and second phases of their process, and will now conduct our own assessment of the merits of the remaining application. No one expected Formula 1 management to greet any new teams with open arms, but a one-sentence acknowledgement of the FIA's decision is colder than expected. The lack of response from FOM could just be seen as them wanting to stay impartial until a decision has been made either way, but given the context of previous statements from them and the teams, it is perhaps more indicative of how they intend to handle Andretti, ideally ignoring him until he goes away." I'll come back to that shortly though. The Andretti Cadillac partnership said, "We appreciate the FIA's rigorous, transparent and complete evaluation process, and are incredibly excited to be given the opportunity to compete in such a historic and prestigious championship. We look forward to engaging with all of the stakeholders in Formula 1 as we continue our planning to join the grid as soon as possible." For those of you who don't know, Andretti Autosport is a well-established brand in the States and is gaining recognition globally. They came 3rd in the Formula E Constructors' Championship last season, and Jake Dennis, driving one of their cars, won the Drivers' Championship. They have had 5 Indy 500 winners as well, which is an achievement worth noting. What Andretti isn't though is a huge brand like Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, Aston Martin, Renault, Alfa Romeo or Red Bull. And that seems to be a problem for the non-governing body stakeholders in Formula 1. When Andretti first expressed interest in joining Formula 1, he made a very big fuss about why he should be allowed to join the grid, and why the other teams were trying to stop him. He went out of his way to offend everyone involved in Formula 1, and since then, the objectors to him have been far more vocal than the supporters. While the FIA's due diligence process is a rigorous assessment of each applicant's sporting, technical and financial analysis, the final phase essentially boils down to whether Andretti can convince the commercial rights holder, who listened very closely to the current teams, to drop an objection it has had for a very long time. F1 has been lukewarm at best regarding the prospect of a new team joining the grid, and has the ability to refuse a commercial agreement, even though it would be controversial and open to a potential legal challenge. The structure of Formula 1 is sometimes a little confusing. In this case, it is important to remember that while the FIA is the governing body and the rule makers, the commercial rights holders, or Formula 1 management, or FOM, are the ones who control the money side of the sport. While many will see the FIA's approval as a green light for Andretti, FOM can still block them physically appearing on the grid, though the details of what that might involve are hazy even by Formula 1 standards. If discussions with FOM don't go the way that Andretti and the FIA want them to, which is definitely a possibility, then we could all be left scratching our heads wondering why we wasted so much time on this. At the moment, the FIA and FOM appear to have very different opinions on Andretti's entry, and this is new ground for the sport. This didn't happen when Haas was given an F1 entry. It did not happen when 4 teams were granted spots on the grid for 2010 either. When the teams were approved, they were approved. They knew, we knew, all the stakeholders knew. Instead of approval from the FIA meaning approval from the sport, Andretti must instead work its way into the Concord Agreement, which is the contract that controls the financial side of Formula 1, despite the members of the agreement having said for the past year that they think this whole thing is a farce and they want nothing to do with an 11th team. Imagine you're at school and there's a football game going on that you want to join in with. The teachers have said you can, but every single kid playing says they don't want you there. You can stand in the middle of the field and run around a bit, but no one's going to pass you the ball. That is the situation that Andretti finds himself in. He has to convince those kids to pass in the ball. The problem for us as fans is that we now have no idea what is going to happen. We don't know what the process is for Andretti to get the approval of FOM and his signature on the Concord Agreement. We don't know how long that will take. And we don't know what the consequences of a rejection from FOM would be. At least with the FIA's part of the process, there was a modicum of transparency. Now though, we're in the darkest depths of Formula 1's incredibly complex contractual system, a place where no one, even those who have access to those contracts, truly know what is going on. Quite simply, there's an awful lot of misinformation, assumption and conjecture out there, but the reality is, no one has an effing clue what happens next. This has been coming as well. This whole process has been a staged power struggle between the FIA president Mohammed Ben Sulayem, who was told to back out of the sport last year, and FOM, who were the ones that told him he was over-interfering. FOM's issue is that by approving Andretti, the FIA have put the weight of international law and an ever-growing American fan base behind Andretti's team. If you turn down an outfit with proven motorsports pedigree, which also has the backing of a major car maker behind it, even if that manufacturer is not building an engine straight away, it's almost as good as saying no new team would ever be good enough to enter. A Cadillac-branded Andretti doesn't look much less viable a proposition than Dorilton-backed Williams does, or Ferrari customer Haas does, or even staunch independent constructor McLaren does. All Andretti lacks by comparison is an F1 legacy beyond what Michael and Mario in particular did as drivers. If Haas can enter F1 and do what it's done, it feels instinctively like Andretti could even be a step beyond that, considering the added General Motors weight behind it. The world is watching, and should Andretti be rejected, the reasoning will need to be sound and clearly expressed. Simply concluding that it won't add value to F1 and stating that isn't enough. F1 needs to lay out how those criteria were created and measured against. If that's not done, it'll be interpreted as shutting the door on potential growth out of short-term self-interest. Motorsport's governing body has accepted Andretti, so it's now down to F1 to make its choice. If it says no, that might potentially open it up to anti-competition action. So while Andretti might have the approval of the FIA, they're still a long way from entering a car onto the grid. But while FOM and the current teams may want to reject them out of principle, the reality is that doing so will be far from simple. And if they do reject them, the repercussions could be incredibly damaging. What do you think of the Andretti team? Should they be allowed in, or will they be rejected? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and until next time, drive safe and bye for now.